In this lesson, we will center our attention on the techniques for managing essential cognitive processing, including the segmenting and pre-training principles. Much like sections or parts of a line are called segments, the segmenting principle breaks a complex lesson into parts that are easier to comprehend. Look at this diagram and consider a narrated animation on how this bicycle tire pump works that has a script like this. When the handle is pulled up, the piston moves up, the inlet valve opens, the outlet valve closes, air enters the cylinder. When the handle is pushed down, the piston moves down, the inlet valve closes, and the outlet valve opens, and the air exits from the cylinder through a hose. In this lesson, there are 5 main elements: handle, piston, cylinder, inlet valve, and outlet valve. This lesson is fairly simple and could possibly be divided into 2 segments, as this figure shows. One to show what happens when the handle is pulled up, and one to show what happens when the handle is pulled down. When an unfamiliar learner receives a continuous presentation containing a lot of interrelated concepts, the result will most likely be a cognitive system overload. Suppose as a part of an e-course, a learner watches a 2.5-minute video on lightning, as shown here. Unless the learner has prior knowledge, he or she may miss one of the important points, and the material will no longer make sense. One solution is to insert a continue button in the lower right-hand corner of each segment, allowing the learner to digest each step before moving to the next step, as shown here. There is evidence that segmenting helps people learn better. After conducting a study on the lightning lesson in a continuous presentation versus a segmented presentation, this group of researchers found that the learners who received the segmented presentation performed better on transfer tests. In a similar study, teachers who viewed a continuous 20-minute video performed worse on a transfer test than teachers who viewed the segmented version. A set of studies were conducted where students learned how an electric motor works by watching a continuous narrated animation or by watching a segmented version where the student could click on a question and then see part of the narrated animation, click on another question, see the part of narrated animation, and so on. The material presented in both versions were identical, but the group of learners performed much better if they had received the segmented version. A final study compared learning from a continuous video versus a video with an inserted pause button that would allow learners to stop and start the animation when needed. The study results indicated no differences in learning in the 2 versions because most learners did not use the pause button. This allowed the video to play as a continuous video. The research team suggests that one should design the animation to stop at a reasonable segment with the continue button.
The pre-training principle ensures that learners know the names and characteristics of key concepts. The psychological reason for the pre-training principle is to help beginners manage their processing of complex material by reducing the amount of essential processing they do at the time of presentation. To implement the pre-training principle, evaluate the material that needs to be taught. Identify key concepts that could be presented prior to teaching the main lesson. 2 different examples of pre-training are displayed in this chapter. A short pre-training episode was constructed in which learners saw a labeled diagram of the braking system and could click on a part. Learners who received this kind of pre-training before the narrated animation performed better on tests than learners who did not receive pre-training. In an e-learning environment, students learn to solve electronics troubleshooting problems better if they received factual information before training, rather than within the context of training. Electrical engineering trainees took a course that included a multimedia lesson on conducting safety tests for electrical appliances. The pre-training group first was shown how each component worked individually. The no pre-training group was shown how all of the electrical components work together within an electrical system. On transfer tests, the pre-training group outperformed. We do not yet know how big a segment should be, or how long it should last, or where to break a continuous lesson into meaningful segments. We also do not yet know how best to identify key concepts that should be included in pre-training, or even how extensive the pre-training needs to be. Answering these questions depends on the characteristics of the learner and the learner's prior knowledge.